Hello and welcome to the Film Story Recap channel. The 100-meter-tall monster grabbed a house on the ground with his palm, casually throws and smashes helicopter gunships directly. This is the latest Norwegian film release in 2022. Troll, originally a 1,000-year-old legend of a mountain monster, but now it has been awakened and reappeared on Earth. What can mankind do to stop this deadly catastrophe? The Norwegian government is planning to open a railroad tunnel in the Dorfler Mountains, but many environmentalists protested. But the construction team couldn't care less. Explosives were planted in the cave and detonated them in front of everyone. When the smoke cleared, the construction team entered the cave to see the results. Suddenly the ground began to crumble. Countless pieces of rubble fell from the top of the tunnel. However, they were buried alive by the boulders in the next second. The government received the news and immediately sent air support. But as the pilots approached the mountain range, they found a terrible scene. The area around the construction cave had been razed to the ground. None of the protesters had been spared, and they also found that many places around the cave had caved in. The shape looked like human footprints. When people were confused, a female technician came in. She said she had fixed the phone of an environmental protester. Then the crowd saw this image. Countless huge rocks splash and come, and when the scene was frozen at a certain moment, a huge humanoid creature like King Kong appeared in the picture. This also dazzled the Prime Minister and the generals. They decided to call the most famous paleontologist in the country to solve the mystery. Nora, a paleontologist who had just led a team to successfully excavate a dinosaur fossil. She was taken by military helicopter to an office full of top government officials. According to Nora's expertise, the largest known primate was about 4 meters tall. The creature in the video is already 40 meters tall. She believes that in the face of such an unknown creature with supernatural powers, the only way to come to a conclusion is to go to the scene and investigate for yourself. Meanwhile, around the Dorfler Mountains, an elderly couple was having lunch at home, but the dog outside the door keeps barking in the distance. A violent tremor approached the house. The two men rushed into the basement to escape. When there was no more noise outside, only then did they open the basement and come out to find their house in ruins. And not far from the house, there was a huge footprint. Nora arrived here by helicopter. He met with Captain Chris, who was in charge of the operation. He took the two men to investigate near the huge footprints. Nora went into the footprints to look but found nothing, but smelled an indescribable smell of primitive nature. Then they followed the footprints on the ground in a helicopter, only to find that the footprints disappeared without a trace 20 kilometers away. The army used thermal imaging to detect the surrounding area but found no signs of life. This is where things completely lost the trail. In order to find out the truth, Nora remembered that her father had told her about mountain monsters when she was a child in the mountains. A long time ago, a mountain monster had a wedding. 13 monsters got drunk and lost track of time. And when the sun came up, the sun turned them all into stone, and the mountains around here were made of those 13 mountain monsters. She found her elderly father and brought him again to the place where the footprints had disappeared. With the map, he kept comparing the surroundings. Gradually, her father noticed that the terrain was different from the map. Just when they were puzzled, a huge eye opened up from behind them. Under the eyes of the people's disbelief, a huge stone monster with a tail slowly crawled up. Nora rushed to the helicopter with her father. The monster with a huge body did not attack them. Instead, it kept roaring at the helicopter. The footage was synced to government agencies. Nora said they did not know anything about this unknown creature. She wants to try to communicate with each other, but the Secretary of Defense thought there was nothing on Earth that heat weapons couldn't handle, so a powerful army was sent to intercept the monster in its path. They attacked the mountain monster the moment they saw its figure, but the rocket launcher hit the mountain monster is almost like scratching an itch. Only a few small stones were dropped. However, after the smoke cleared, the enraged mountain monsters rushed toward the army as if they were unharmed. In only a few minutes, tanks and armored vehicles were mercilessly crushed by the monster. Nora a few people hiding behind a small slope, but the monster was attracted by the blood of the wounded soldiers, grabbed the soldier and throw it into his mouth. Just as the men tried to continue their escape, Nora's father walked towards the mountain monster with his hands in the air, trying to communicate with the other side with words. The mountain monster seemed to feel the kindness, stopped moving to look at him, but the surviving soldiers in an armored car started shooting at the mountain monster. When the mountain monster turned to look at the armored car, the tail behind it sent Nora's father flying straight away. The mountain monster stomped on the armored car and then looked at Nora's father. Nora's father gave a good-natured smile to the mountain monster. The mountain monster ignored them and went straight away. Nora's father died after saying the words king and home to him before he died. Nora returned to the base and researched his father's notes from the past. In the Norwegian fairy tale of the mountain monster, the other side only appears at night and seems to be afraid of sunlight, but this mountain monster appeared in the daytime. Then she remembered the legend of the mountain monster throwing stones at the church. So Nora had a plan in mind, but when she told it to the Secretary of Defense, she was ridiculed. But Chris thought they were encountering an unknown monster. With his help and persuasion, the military agreed to implement Nora's plan. By now, the mountain monster had arrived at a playground on the outskirts of the city. Nora and the others flew towards the monster in 4 military helicopters with giant bells on board, constantly circling around the mountain monster. As expected, the mountain monster's keen hearing became his weakness. The striking of the bell made him cover his ears and keep wailing. Just when they thought they had the troll in check, the mountain monster grabbed the amusement park ticket booth and threw it at one of the helicopters. The remaining helicopters can no longer stop the mountain monster, only to see him grab the toy-like helicopter, slammed him hard into another one, but the helicopter that was about to crash over the fairgrounds crowd was grabbed by the mountain monster. He seemed reluctant to hurt the child. After venting his anger, the mountain monster headed in the direction of the city. The people in the city watching the live broadcast were already in a panic. Other countries on the planet were surprised by the unknown monster. Japan even called it the Norwegian version of Godzilla. Norwegian Prime Minister announced the coming of the mountain monster in the news. A state of emergency was declared. Although the government has done its best to control the situation, but all their previous efforts had failed. Only the evacuation of the city could be arranged. Nora's car was stuck on the road out of the city. She still held her father's handwriting and did not give up. She recalled that her father seemed to have said one name before he died: Ricard. The Prime Minister's secretary at the side had heard of him. He said that he was the official minister of the palace. So Nora and the two of them went to the palace and found Ricard, but he recognized Nora right away. It turned out that Ricard and Nora's father had known each other for a long time. He took them to the garage of the palace. After opening a secret passage, they entered a huge space. In front of them was a huge pile of skeletons. Ricard says this was once the home of the mountain monster. Thousands of years ago, during the Christianization of Norway, people slaughtered almost all of them, but one descendant of the king of the monsters escaped into the Dorfler Mountains. They couldn't find it, so they left it to die. Instead, he was awakened by the construction of a tunnel in the mountains. The mountain monster came here to try to return to his home. At this moment, Nora unexpectedly found, under the ultraviolet light in her hand, the skeleton on the ground began to melt. They remembered that the mountain monster had indeed appeared during the day, but it was a cloudy day, and there was no sunlight. Nora told Chris, who was evacuating the crowd, about the monster's weaknesses, while asking Ricard to prepare a vehicle for them. And at this time, the military's last blockade of the mountain monster into the city also ended in failure. The Prime Minister has no choice but to agree to the use of small nuclear missiles to end the monster. At this time, two people driving a truck appeared in front of the mountain monster. A huge round object covered by a curtain was tied to the back of the van. The curtain opened after they drove past the foot of the monster. Inside was the skull of the mountain monster's ancestor. The truck drove up the road and attracted the mountain monster. On the other hand, Chris is setting up UV lights in a park with a group of his men. The skull behind the truck fell in the middle of the road. Just see the mountain monster pick up the skull. Seems to remember what? It made a cry. Angry mountain monster chasing towards the van. The two of them were caught up by the mountain monster at the edge of the park. Seeing the big hand of the opponent swinging, Nora rushed to jump out of the car to escape. By this time, the mountain monster had entered Chris's envelope. Under his command, the soldiers turned on their UV lights and shone them on the monster. Sure enough, the other side's movement was restricted. At the same time, the military fighter jets with nuclear missiles were approaching the monster. They spotted the men surrounding the mountain monster. When the missile launch was requested, the defense minister tried to order the launch despite the presence of civilians, but was knocked to the ground by a female technician. The crowd embraced in excitement as they watched the mountain monster wail in pain in the ultraviolet light. But Nora couldn't bear it. She didn't think it was right to kill a mountain monster that was also an intelligent being, so she turned off the ultraviolet light and went to the mountain monster. She told him to get out of there and go back to the mountain. The mountain monster seemed to understand the other side of the idea, but when he stood up, it was too late. The first rays of the morning sun were already shining on the mountain monster's body. As the legend goes, the mountain monster collapsed into a pile of boulders in the sunlight, and so the catastrophe was over. But what the excited people didn't know was that, far away in the Dorfler Mountains, in the tunnel that was blown up, another mountain monster emerged from the ground. The film is a side story about the relationship between humans and the natural environment and other beings in the natural world. For humans, any species that is taller and more powerful than humans is a threatening species. Therefore, humans cannot allow them to exist. But the truth is that the mountain monsters were forced out of the mountains. It is the result of man's desire to build a home of his own. The good side is to build your own home. The bad side is to satisfy self-interest and endless desires. The result is the destruction of the nature on which mankind lives. Well, that's it for the movie. Please subscribe to my channel, and we will see you next time.